haven't even done anything yet.
John Verry, the man is in the house. It is an honor to have you for a compliance corner. But we have to get through our introductions first. So welcome everyone to another Prevail Compliance Corner. I am Orly Burlov, and this is my colleague Noel.
Hello.
And we are honored to have John Verry from Pivot Point. John, Noel and I know who you are. You know, you were on our CMMC day just a few weeks ago, and you've talked to us a lot in the past, and we are honored to have you here on Compliance Corner for the first time. Why don't you just give everyone who doesn't know who you are a brief introduction, so about who you are,
Sure.
what you do.
Sure. John Verry, I'm with a company called Pivot Point Security. We are a organization that helps organizations that need to be provably secure and compliant, prove they're secure and compliant. Obviously, these days, for our clients that are in the DIB, which are quite a few, that means DFARS, 800-171, CMMC compliance. And what I found out today, I have a new title. It's Emperor of the Tri-State Region. Thank you, Noel and Orly, for letting me know that. I hadn't realized that up to this point.
We'll put see if we can go back over this video with After Effects and put a little corona on your.
I've always wanted to have a crown. There's a secret princess sitting inside of me.
Everybody wants that.
Everybody, who doesn't want to be a Disney princess?
Who doesn't want that? Exactly.
I'm just wondering, should the crowd?
The audience already. So should we get to before we do the other half?
I'm just wondering, do you want a crown so that you look like Prince Charles, or do you want a crown so you look like a Caesar, more like like the leaves, the laurel?
I definitely don't want to look like Prince Charles. Any association with the English royalty these days is not what it used to be. So I'm gonna go Caesar. And if you want, we can put my hair down in bangs so it looks a little more appropriate.
Very good. All right. On that auspicious note, why don't we just jump in to today? And so let me tell the audience what we're going to talk about. One of the things that we've been really focused on and find interesting here at Prevail is a lot of the conversation about that people have in the hoi polloi about kicking the can down the road in terms of compliance. People say, well, CMMC is not coming out till 2023. So I'll wait to see how that all pans out before I start on my compliance journey, or, whether I rush to get anything done. But what we want to kind of talk about today is how that's kind of a secondary notion, and what you need to think about is your existing compliance obligations. And, what we're going to talk about is how those flow out. And then we're going to have John kind of, in his role as king or prince or duke or
Emperor.
State area. We're going to have him take out his crystal ball and have him talk a little bit about what he thinks is going to happen in 2023. So let's see if we can get to all that. So let's just do a little bit of the drum roll, and then we'll get started. Boom. All right.
A long drum roll. Wow.
That is a long drum roll. I'm still having fun with all these sound effects on this program. All right. So what we had wanted to talk about was just jump in and talk about, while CMMC is important, you really already have this existing obligation to meet the NIST 800 requirements, and kind of the way CMMC is just a formalization of your existing obligations. So what do you have to say to that, John? Why don't you just kick it off?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception and why people are procrastinating is they're waiting to figure out what CMMC is or isn't. And the reality is that you don't need to be CMMC compliant. You need to be DFARS compliant. And that DFARS obligation that exists in CMMC already exists in your contracts that you've had in place since 2016, December of 2016, early 2017. So, and what's also interesting is that with the change to CMMC v2, we're back to exactly where we were. NIST SP 800-171, which went into effect in late 2016, has been in effect and governs the protection of controlled unclassified information, or CUI, as you often hear said. And today, a CMMC compliant state is nothing more than NIST 800-171 compliant. So, and the other challenge I don't think people realize is that I'm waiting to see what happens. What is going to happen is already what is happening to you now. The only difference with CMMC is the formality of a third-party assessment. But under the existing 7012 clause, you're already obligated. And every time you send an invoice into the government under 7012, you are asserting that you are fully compliant with NIST 800-171. And if you are not, you're subject to civil litigation under the False Claims Act. And as we know, the DOJ funded the Civil Cyber Crime Initiative, I think they call it,
Initiative.
significantly last year, and has been aggressive in pursuing these False Claims Acts. So the reality is nothing has changed. We need to be compliant now. Your 7012 clause that was in place, by the way. Also, the other fallacy is, I need to be CMMC compliant. If you look at CMMC, which is now 800-171, that's what people think of as being CMMC compliant. But you have to remember, in the DFARS 7012 clause, you have additional, clause
Right.
C through M specify other things, most notably the requirement for cyber incident response to be able to report a cyber incident within a 72-hour window, and the responsibility to flow down the requirements to third parties that have access, to CUI as well. Your 7012 clause will update, to a 7019 clause on any type of contract renewal, change in contract, or new contract minimally, either a 7019-20 or soon to be 21. But just to be clear, if you get a 7019 clause, that obligates you to SPRS, to uploading a score into SPRS. You have to have, quote unquote, a current score, which is defined as a
An
score that's
honest
less than 3
current
years
score.
old. Well, the problem is that, you should have an honest score.
You should have an honest current score. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we all know that. I think people put in honest scores, but they are not reality. They're not using the DoD assessment methodology well, right?
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about a lot on here, where you have to be very honest with yourself and not just say, oh, well, we're going to do this, like next month, so we're fine, or we're thinking about doing, that you have to be there. It has to be fully implemented to say fully implemented. It really, really does. Sorry.
And they did, the DIBCAC did a review, and I don't remember the exact number, but they did a review of a bunch of SPRSs, and they said that the vast majority of them were vastly overstated what their actual score would be.
I think the number was like 85%, if I remember. It was insanely large.
Bastianic on a webinar a couple of months ago, and I think it was either her.
She's the one that I heard. I heard the number from her as well. I just can't remember what the number was. I just know it was vastly overrated. And I can tell you, just from the conversations, we have conversations every day with folks that are trying to figure out their CMMC, journey and DFARS requirements. And I can't tell you how many times I'll ask someone, do you have a score on SPRS? And they'll say yes. And the score will usually be somewhere between 70 and 100. And remember, 110 is perfect. 203. Technically, there's an argument as whether or not you can have a 203 score in there, because minus 203, because if you don't have an SSP, you can't. Either way, minus 200 is where you could be. It's exceedingly rare that I've ever heard anyone say that they've got a negative score. Most people think their score is between 75 and 110. And the reality is, then I'll ask them, how confident are you in your system security plan? And the answer will typically be, well, not that confident, or we haven't looked at it in a while, or probably needs to be updated. So if you don't have confidence in your SSP, you can't have a score technically in SPRS.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, because I've certainly seen that disconnect as well, where there'll be that I have conversations with customers and potential customers who will, I'll say, well, how confident are you in your program? Oh, we're really confident. Oh, everything's great. And then usually the next comment is something about how the SSP hasn't really been updated, or we have one, but I don't think it's really accurate anymore, or I think we have one somewhere. I don't know where it is. And there is a serious somewhere, somewhere in there. I think there's a real disconnect. People, it's always amazing to me how easy it is for people to say. And I think your point, this is something we're supposed to have been doing right since 2017 in December. And I think there's a lot of people who have been in this whole ecosystem that whole time going, oh, well, yeah, that's not really a thing I have to worry about. That's just something that pops up on my contract. And I just say, yeah, sure, I'm doing it, and it's fine. And now that everybody is sort of getting that pressure on them, between the DOJ and the DOD and CMMC is really just more of that pressure and more of that ability for the DOD to actually double check that what you're saying is actually happening. And I think that a lot of people are not understanding that that's, like you said, you're supposed to already do this, and not just say that you're doing it like you've been able to get away with before, but you're not allowed to get away with that anymore. I mean, you shouldn't have been able to get away with it anyway, but at this point now people are really coming and knocking on your door and saying, hey, what are you doing?
Right. And speaking to that, right, you're talking about like when we get to 7021 starts to be in contracts, which it appears as though it'll be May, June of next year. But remember, you're going to, I've seen clients with 7020 clauses in their contracts already. And what a 7020 clause does is it obviates you to, not only the SPRS score, but it obligates you to allow a visit from the DIBCAC, right? You have to provide access, quote unquote, provide access to facility systems and personnel for an assessment.
Yep. What would be the reason why that would be enacted? Is it because the DIBCAC thinks, company
I think it would
be
higher priority, say comms, military, weapons, entities that are a higher risk from a higher priority from the DIBCAC's perspective.
The other thing to think about too, because that's a really good point, is that, that June memo that we talked about here, really, stating that now cores and KOs, it's really, the onus is now on them for contract modifications. If you have a contract modification that comes through now, those cores and KOs have to double check your SPRS score and do sort of like what would one consider sort of like a very, not an audit, but an assessment of what you have like for paper, like your SSP, for example. So if you give your core your SSP and they look at it and they find out very quickly that, your 110 score is not supported in any way, then that's when they could easily call DIBCAC if that's what they wanted to do. They're well within their rights to say, we have somebody who needs to have an assessment now. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, it's not just CMMC, it's not just DFARS now. It's more than that now, because there's more of that pressure coming from multiple different angles. So these people who are saying that 2023 is when they have to worry about it, no, like you should be if you have a contract with the United States government, especially like if you have a contract with the DoD right now and you have a 7012 clause, it's already applying to you, and you already have multiple mechanisms where somebody could come and check on you.
Yeah, and speaking to that pressure, right? I mean, I think the other form of pressure which for many of our clients is perhaps as important or more important is pressure from the primes. Right. So we're seeing the primes are ahead of the game, and they're pushing for, to validate scores and SPRS because they have an obligation, right? They're responsible to flow down, right, and validate this. And we've even seen some of the larger primes that everybody knows, them actually asking for more than just NIST 800-171 conformance. So we saw one from someone that actually talked about CIS, the Center for Internet Security, CSC, critical security controls.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, the reality is that, so even, let's just say for sake of argument that you are fortunate enough that none of the contracts that you're bidding on, into the latter part of next year have an obligation to actually go through a CMMC assessment. That doesn't mean that you'll be able to participate in those RFPs if the primes think that you don't have sufficient security, right? So if you're not living up to the prime security requirements, think about it from their perspective, that there's $1 trillion acquisition out there and they're putting together a pursuit team. Are they going to want to put together a pursuit team that has a good security story or not, knowing where this is all going? So, I think that's another part of that pressure that, I'm always trying to make sure that people are thinking about.
That's actually a really, really good point. And we've certainly, I know I've certainly talked to plenty of people who are out there. It seems like the supply chain is finally getting more like, oh man, this is something that we have to do. Because I think in the beginning of CMMC, there were a lot of, I think those that are supply, part of the supply chain who were like, oh, well, this is something the prime is going to have to worry about. Like, it's not going to affect me. And I think now finally it's starting to hit all of these different manufacturing companies and other supplies, members of the supply chain all the way down, who, like you said, those primes are coming at them and saying, hey, here's this list of, 150 questions that you have to answer. I need to know exactly what you're doing. It's not just, and like you said, it's not just 800-171 with a lot of these primes, because like you said, they want to make sure to cover themselves. If you've got, millions,
they're not in compliance, right? If you're Lockheed Martin, if you're Northrop Grumman, if you're Raytheon, okay, and you have a 7012 clause or a 7019 clause, right? 72. You have any of these clauses in your contracts. If you are not flowing down that requirement, and if you're not doing something to evidence the fact that these entities have at least asserted that they've got those controls in place, then you're not compliant with
exactly.
DFARS. So and they're going to manage their risk.
Right, exactly. That's not something those companies are going to be okay with. That's not. There is no way that, like you said, a Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or a Leidos or whoever is going to say, "Oh, that's fine, no big deal that you X supplier don't have exactly what you need. It's not a big deal. We'll keep working with you anyway." That's not going to happen. They're going to, like you said, they're going to go to the next guy who does have that and who can attest in some way to that, and they're going to give the work to that person. So it's not just the, oh man, the boogeyman's going to come and and tell on me about my SSP. It's also your actual contracts could suffer and you could lose money. I mean, not even the contracts that could come down the pipe, but the ones you already have. It's very easy for, like you said, a prime that's going to be risk averse in that situation, understandably, who could say, well, you know what, that's great that you make widget A. I'm going to find somebody who can make widget A and also not get me in trouble.
Right. Yeah, I also had an attorney who specializes in export control on our podcast recently. Hasn't dropped yet. But the other thing, which I didn't realize, right, is we're talking about, and most of the time when we're having these conversations, we're talking about CUI basic or basic CUI. But there is CUI specified, and one of the major specifications is EXPT, which is the export control stuff. And I'm amazed how often, most notably that's ITAR and EAR and no foreign and 2 and these other standards. But I'm amazed how often folks are not able to answer that question. And she was citing the fact, well, we do have it, but they don't seem to have a good answer to it. And she was citing the fact that in the event that you have a breach of ITAR data, that is 20 years, potentially 20 years in jail. And if you have asserted to the fact that you have those controls in place, right, by billing the government under these contracts that specify that, that also that's another 20 years for false claims, right? So that's the other question, thing too, is that be aware if you've got CUI specified that all of this conversation takes on a heightened level of importance.
Jeez, yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to jump in with a question here. I mean, John, you hear this more acutely since you are working with customers all day long. What is kind of the conversation that they are having in terms of their acceptance or their realization of what's coming down the tunnel?
I think most the ostrich with the head in the sand. I think what's happened is that they're a little bit jaded by the fact that realistically, I think they recognize the government has been trying to enforce these requirements since 2016. They've kind of gotten away with half-assing it, excuse the expression, since 2016. And I think that, senior management is hesitant to invest large amounts of money into CMMC compliance if they're not yet there, thinking I can probably, hey, you know what, it really hasn't happened. Let me see if it really does start to happen. So I do think that there's this wait and see, which is, I think, the predominant thing that we're hearing. I think the people that are getting ahead of it have two attributes that are forcing it. One, we're hearing pressure from primes, and they're being told by their prime, unless you do this, you're not going to participate in this contract or participate in this pursuit of a contract. And then I think that we see people thinking of it as being a business advantage. So they're saying, okay, look, and also a fear. So some of the people have been, a lot of the DIB is manufacturing. And if you're in the DIB and you've been in manufacturing for a while, I don't remember the year, but when ISO 9001 became really important and everybody was pushing to get ISO 9001 certified, I've talked to ISO 9001 certification firms that said in those days it wasn't unusual for you to wait 16 to 18 months to get an ISO 9001 audit. So what was happening is these companies that were trying to service certain industries that were requiring ISO 9001 were sort of locked out for extended periods of time. I think some of the people that have been around long enough are looking at this and saying that that's a distinct possibility. We have a limited number of consultants that really know how to implement this stuff well and get you prepared. We have a limited number of organizations that can migrate you to email solutions that need, and make changes in your environment, right? Migrate to, SIMs and SOCs and things of that nature that you're probably going to need to do. And then you've got a limited number of C3PAOs and a limited number of certified auditors, right? We have 0 right now. We've just got the provisional. So I think that's one of the, their thinking is, what, let me get ahead of this, and use it as a competitive differentiator. So I think those are the people that are investing now. We have seen a big ramp beginning in Q3. So last year, Q1 through Q3, we were rocking and rolling. It was all systems go, signing on new clients, every month, right? Lots of new clients. And then what happened was Q4 and Q1 of Q4 of 2021 and Q1 of 2022, we had 0 new clients because everyone was waiting. I'm not doing anything until the DoD. A little bit in Q2 this year, but now Q3 really started to pick up, and Q4 is really rocking and rolling again. So I think there's enough people out there that are, getting ahead of the curve. It's keeping us busy, but I think there's going to be a massive tidal wave, in Q1, Q2, Q3 of next year.
Could not agree with you more, because we've certainly had conversations. I've had conversations with multiple different C3POs that we work with. There's only 28 right now that are certified. 28. That's it.
How many of them are what you call like provisional or about ready to get?
There are only 28 certified C3PAOs. Okay. End of discussion. That's it.
And there's 40,000 that are organizations that are probably likely to want to get L2 certified in the next 2 years.
Right. I mean, how is that? I mean, the conversations I've had with the C3PO partners we have, there's been a handful of them I've talked to, and every one of them has said that they are booked out into next year, like well into next year. Some of them are booked out into like September or October of next year. I mean, that's how, so exactly what you're talking about. There are a lot of people who have finally figured out, oh, this is a big deal, I need to do it. And they're not necessarily, I wouldn't call them early adopters at this point, but they are going ahead and making that decision because they do want that business advantage. And that's exactly what I've heard from all those C3POs, is that most of the people that they have are like, this is an advantage for my business. There are going to be people out there who don't do this. I don't want to be one of those people. Right. I don't want to miss out on that money. I don't want to miss out on those opportunities and those connections that I'm going to have by doing this. So yeah, you are absolutely right. If you read, this is something that we have a blog about this that we did back in like March, I think, really talking about a timeline of like, okay, this is where you should be. Right. And we were saying in March, if you haven't started yet, you're behind. and right now there are still people who have not started that journey. And we're, in November of 2022, this needs to be a priority. We cannot say it enough for a million different reasons.
My concern is going to be that, because like we've been helping orgs become provably secure to these significant standards of this nature, like ISO 27001, SOC 2, FedRAMP, High Trust, right, for years. And to build a good cybersecurity program, it would be unusual for it to take less than 6 months, and it's typically 6 to 12 months. I'd say these days 10 months or so is kind of like the sweet spot to do this in a way which is not overly business disrupting, and to end up with a really good quality product, right? A cybersecurity program that you can live with on a go-forward basis, right? One that's effective and efficient, one that operates the way it's supposed to, protects your organization, enables your business from a sales perspective to sell. So, my concern is that what you're going to end up with is, people are going to want to get done fast. And there are organizations out there that say, oh yeah, we can get you done. We can get you done in 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, which is just not realistic. And you're going to see, you're going to see people that, spend money, implement something, and then it needs to be re-engineered and refixed.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And I personally had conversations with a few different, these were prospective customers who were telling me all kinds of horror stories about that exact thing. I had one person who told me that they had someone who told them that in 3 days they could become completely compliant. Just give me $5,000 in 3 days and then it'll be great. Everything's fine. These are unfortunately the people that are out there. And there are so many members of the DIB who, are just, like a manufacturing company that's stressed out about, their day-to-day stuff they have to do. They just want somebody to come in and make it go away, right? Hey, I just want this done. And these people are taking advantage of those individuals. And you have to do your due diligence and be very aware, like, does this person have the right credentials? Is this someone that I can actually depend on? Are they going to give me exactly what they're saying they're going to give me? Is the price reasonable? Is the timeline reasonable? Because like you said, 6 months, I think definitely, depending on the organization, is very aggressive. And I agree, like 10 to 12 months is more reasonable for most organizations. And like you said, it has to be something that doesn't disrupt your business process, and also is something you can maintain, because you can't just go, okay, I did my assessment, I'm done now. You have to keep that up, because at any point the DoD could ask you for any of that information. And also you're going to have to do another assessment in a couple of years. it's so much easier, even though it doesn't sound like it, it's so much easier to just keep doing that stuff and keeping on top of it during that time. So then the assessment comes around, it's easy, you've got everything, you're ready to go.
But you've attested to the fact. I mean, under 2021, right? They use the language to achieve and maintain the requisite CMMC level for the duration of the contract.
Yep.
So
exactly.
if you get certified and then you fail to, and your certification says we're going to do quarterly reviews of this, we're going to do monthly reviews of this, we're going to do annual reviews of this, we're going to maintain this level of security. If you fail to do that, right, then you have failed to live up to the obligation of the contract, and you are subject to. I mean, that's fraud, right?
Yeah.
Let me,
And if you had a breach, and you either failed to report it or you reported the breach, and they came in and realized that as an example, let's say you said that we're going to maintain, a USM Anywhere SIM solution that monitors all CUI relevant assets, and they were able to determine that system had been turned off or wasn't still configured properly. Yeah, I don't want to be that guy.
I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, let me just jump in here. We have a couple minutes left, John, but I'd be very interested to kind of get your crystal ball out and see, kind of how you think this is going to play out over the next couple of months. Do you think there's going to be kind of a, I don't know, pardon the expression, but a come to Jesus moment, and people are suddenly going to?
I fear the come to Jesus moment, and I fear the come to Jesus moment will be when the rulemaking occurs, right? For some people.
Yeah,
right.
For a lot of people.
So I mean, in March, it's assuming it's on track, right? And Stacy's been consistent, Stacey Janik, since probably like March, April of this year, saying that March, right, is when they anticipate the rulemaking. So it hasn't deviated, which is a pretty interesting sign to me. So I think it might hold. So assuming this happens in March, I think that'll be come to Jesus moment once. Then what people will say, the people who really want to procrastinate, they'll say, well, there is a 60-day review period, and it's open for review and open for comment. So it's either going to be delayed more, or maybe they're going to, in the comments like they did the last time, it's going to change again. So I think I'm going to wait another 60 days. And until I think it actually, formally you start to see, 7021, hit.
In contracts.
My suspicion is that there's going to be a lot of people that wait to that point. And then, the other thing too, that we have had a number of conversations with people, and I understand this, is some people are trying to figure out whether or not it doesn't make sense to continue to work in the DIB.
And that's really a financial decision you make based on how much of your business is based on the DIB, right? If it's 10%, well, maybe not. But if it's 80%.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to make $100,000 investment, right, you've got to get a return on investment. One of the things that I always try to point out to them is that, because I have these conversations with clients every day, well, we may do it, we may just choose not to. And what I always point out to them is that I'm having that conversation with a lot of people. So what that means is that there's going to be less competition if you decide to actually invest and be in the DIB, right? And with that, and the law of supply and demand says, when there is less supply, and equal demand, price goes up. So, the reality is that, should you choose to stay, you're going to be facing less competition because your weaker competitors are going to go out of this particular market, and you should be in a stronger place, win more business, generate more revenue. So I think you got to really think through. I mean, it's a significant decision for a lot of smaller organizations. I mean, spending 6 figures, which is what it costs a lot of organizations to get there, is a big investment. I completely get and respect that. So it's an interesting decision. So I think unfortunately we're going to get a little bit more of what we're getting. Some of these quote unquote early adopters that are not real early adopters, I agree with that phrase, but I still think they have more foresight than the bulk of the market.
That's for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Samuelson is on the show.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I was thinking Kreskin.
All right, him too.
I was curious.
Third.
That's my dog. the COVID world. The dog strikes. I was curious as to Noel, Orly. Do you also think the same thing? Where do you see in your crystal ball? Because mine's cloudy at best.
I think all of our crystal balls on when it comes to CMMC are pretty cloudy at this point. But My thought is that just from what I've seen, I think there's going to be a big uptick after the first of the year. After we get through the holiday situation, I think people are going to be, kind of slowing down towards the end of the year. And then I think probably January, February, right before everything is supposed to come out, I think people are going to start getting more scared and more like, oh gosh, I should probably really do this. And then I totally agree with you that there's going to be a ton of people who, when the rulemaking actually comes out and goes out for, its comment, there are going to be even more people who are like, oh gosh, this is real. And I definitely agree with you. There's still going to be those people who are like, nah, like we've got 60 days. Like it'll be fine. It'll probably get blown out of the water and we'll never have to do this again or whatever. And again, cannot stress this enough. That honestly doesn't matter. You still have to do this. This is
right.
It really doesn't matter truly, if CMMC, let's say it just does not happen. CMMC doesn't happen. There is no rulemaking. It goes away forever. You still have to do this. This is still something that has to get done. So it is astounding to me that people are still like, well, I'll just wait on CMMC. But as you pointed out, you state every time you send in an invoice, I love that you put it that way. Every time you take money from the government for a contract where you said that you would do this, that's a big deal. You have to make sure that if someone comes knocking on your door, and there are more people who could come knocking on your door now than there have ever been, you need to make sure you're not in this situation. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the one who took money from the government and lied about it. Like, oh, I totally am doing the 800 131. Everything's great. And they come in and find out you're not.
Yeah. What else? When I talked to the attorney, she brought up two things that were interesting. Every time you submit an invoice, it is an assertion, and it's something like $11,000 per invoice, right? And full recovery of all contract and penalties. And then on top of that, which was, she also was pointed out, was under the Whistleblower Act, the person who reports it can get up to like a third of the value. And there was somebody recently that got, I think she was pointing out, like $2.5 million or something of that.
I heard about that. Yeah.
So there is a lot of incentive, for people to do that. So I would encourage, folks to, manage their risk effectively. And, like you said, you've been telling the government you've been doing this since 2016. If you've been in the DIB that long, you need to do it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to call it there. John, it's always a pleasure to have you on or to talk to you and get your perspective. You always have you're close to the ground. So very kind of you to join us.
Thank you for having me.
Give us your perspective.
And now I can go back to, with your blessing, I can go back to ruling the masses.
Go back to your emperor duty. I'm sure there are many.
And I look forward to the photoshopped or whatever the equivalent is in the crown.
I love it.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the emperor's new clothes?
That's another
this is an untucked shirt from their so-and-so collection. We should get out of here before this is just, we started silly, we're ending silly. Let's call it.
It's de-escalating quickly.
Yes. Yeah, let's call it a day, guys.
All
Thanks, guys. Awesome to see you both. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much, John.
All
right.
Bye.